Snow White, no prince to give Disney the kiss of life. For in a moment Snow White first appeared on the big screen in 1937, the world has evolved significantly. So how much has changed with the story of Snow White? Snow White was a story from the Brothers Grimm that was already old in 1937. It was Disney's first full animated movie, a critical and commercial success, with international earnings of $8 million during its initial release, against a budget of $1.5 million. It was the highest grossing film in 1938, and briefly held the record of the highest grossing sound film of all time. Snow White was beloved and successful, something Disney yearns for today. The songs, the animation, the storytelling were all groundbreaking. It's the film your grandma tells you about. And it's hard to exaggerate the success of Snow White. It's still in the top 10 grossing films in the US because of all the numerous re-releases. It spawned a ride at Disney World. It's burned into the cultural zeitgeist. But the modern remake enters a world where the Rachel Zeglers of this world want to smash such monstrosities. Think of the films that were nominated for or won Oscars in 1937 or 1938. As a self-confessed film buff, I can honestly say I've only seen one other film from that list, The Charge of a Light Brigade. So remaking it as a live action seems like a great idea. What could go wrong? It set the tone for generations of Disney princesses. Every child has a favourite princess. I can honestly say I've seen them all over the years, and at least 5 of them in the cinema. Disney as a company achieved something unique. Their name instantly calls to mind values, quality, and innovation. Think of Disney as a parent, and you think there'll be unrivaled quality of animation. There'll be a story that's clean and suitable for children. No sex, dirty jokes, or swearing. There'll be values of decency, honesty, chivalry. The lessons you want your kids to learn. Now, I love Die Hard, The Shining, or Fight Club, but these aren't films for kids. Disney offered family values, a safe choice. Remember the advert, no one got fired for picking IBM? Well, no one got their ear chewed off by the wife for taking the kids to a Disney movie. There are universal values that parents want their children to be exposed to, and Disney offered spoonfuls of it. I remember watching Bedknobs and Broomsticks as a child and being enchanted, or One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing. These were movies about doing the right thing, not being seen to do the right thing. By the 90s, they'd become a bit stale. Pixar was pulling ahead of them. And they came out with Beauty and the Beast. And wow, they reset it just in time for the video rental market. They weren't the boring, stale family studio. They were an interesting family film studio. Disney had a string of hits. All were perfect for kids. Toy Story, Frozen, Moana kept that going. Then came the live action remakes. Can't come up with a new idea? Remake an old one. Unfortunately, there's always a modern twist. But it was subtle at first. Beauty and the Beast was fairly good. The Jungle Book was passable, even if it sat a little in the uncanny valley. Alice in Wonderland was bewitching and weird. Alice Through the Looking Glass showed the cracks. There was something of the one-trick pony about live-action remakes. They had to have the beauty of Disney movies, the innovation of Disney, and capture the essence of what made the original great, whilst being different enough to make it worth watching. To be successful, they had to keep that essence. Mulan showed hints of the issue. I wasn't that crazy about the original Mulan, but Milan made a huge mistake. And I'm not talking about thanking an organisation linked to forced labour for their assistance in the credits. No, Mulan was a story that survived centuries because it had an interesting character. She evolved from a bumbling, weak girl into a great warrior who saved the kingdom. Unfortunately for the writers of modern Hollywood, this poses a huge problem. In order to become amazing, a character has to evolve, and this would mean that they start without being great at anything. Well, Milan was a woman, and to suggest a woman could improve is demeaning. Character arcs make great movies. A character learns and improves. But in the world of modern Hollywood, women and ethnic minorities and disabled people can't be seen as anything but perfect. This same idea gave us Star Wars The Force Awakens, where every man was a bit dumb and useless and flawed, but Rey was a prodigy. Luke was a murderous depressive, Han a miserable old loser, with no one for company but Chewie. But Rey was messianic. Her training was just practice, and as a result, she was a boring character who lacked any development. Disney celebrated their 100th year, 100 years of an icon, so it's time for an iconic remake. However, Disney had already shown many signs that they'd lost their mojo. Disney grew substantially by acquisition. They purchased Lucasfilm, Pixar, Marvel. Marvel moved to Phase 4 after the triumph of Endgame. A studio which could seemingly do nothing wrong has had nothing but misses ever since. WandaVision. The moral of that story was that if you're a powerful woman, nothing you do is evil. She possessed and took over an entire town just to imagine the children she'd never had. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a strong character and an interesting character who's never been properly developed, feels sorry for the terrorists and spends most of the series begging forgiveness for having an American flag. He can't become Captain America because the American flag's so hurtful. Hawkeye, a character who plays second fiddle in his own series to a woman who's better than him in every way because she doesn't have a penis. The Marvels, a film so rewritten it had 3 different names. Loki began well, but became obsessed with pushing an actor as Kang, who was to be the linchpin of all the future films. Frankly, I thought he lacked range and seemed to be one of the most mediocre actors I'd seen in a major series in many years. Unfortunately for Disney, what he lacked in talent he made up for with crimes, and all his plans were defeated. Suddenly he's written out. She-Hulk, a hot mess where the story had to be changed because a man empowered her. Secret War, Nick Fury, the old fool who betrayed Earth, allowed a million alien immigrants to come and take over, deciding to wage a war against the humans. But don't worry, there's a female, and she can easily defeat the bad guy, who, even though he has the combined power of every Marvel superhero all rolled into one in a DNA injection, she can beat him because he's got a penis that gets in the way. Well, the Marvels will go down as one of the biggest failures in movie history. Perhaps when the sequel of a barely liked film requires you to watch half a dozen barely watched series to understand the plot and the main actor is, let's face it, obnoxious. This was inevitable. I had to explain to someone what they needed to watch in order to understand it, and they scratched their head confused, not seeming to know that any of those series existed. Apart from Guardians of the Galaxy, Part 3, which was carried by beloved characters and pumping music, everything in Phase 4 was a steaming pile of disappointment. The franchise, which could do no wrong, can't make a profit and has lost their marvel. The Star Wars acquisition has also been a disaster. The Force Awakens was such a new hope for fans. There were hints of so much to come, but it wasn't to be. The coherency of the plot evaporated as soon as Part 2 came along. Or do I say Part 8? The Last Jedi was like 2 incoherent stories poorly stitched together in the editing suite, and despite J.J. Abrams' return to fix The Last Skywalker, It landed flat, partly because his brash, flash, bang, dazzle approach to movies doesn't fit the series from the mind of a very different creative genius. But there were TV series to save the Star Wars from its ignominy. Andor was within the same universe, and if you like Rogue One, you definitely like Andor. The Mandalorian season 1 was good until they realised that Gina Carano had voted Republican. The most liked and best actress whose face could actually be seen was fired and banned from the studio because she wasn't woke enough. Whispers and then cries were heard that Disney wouldn't hire white men. The force is female, Kennedy pronounced. And she really ran Lucasfilm and the Star Wars franchise into the ground to prove the point. Ashoka, two obnoxious women chasing across the galaxy to find a weak little man, then facing the strategic genius who seems to have no strategic capabilities at all. There's probably nothing in this entire series that made logical sense to me. A beloved iconic franchise of all others, so demeaned by Kennedy and Disney that the acolyte viewing figures had to be manipulated and were still shameful. Obi-Wan, well, a series for people who've never watched or understood Star Wars. Poor script writing, woeful comprehension of Star Wars lore, and open disdain for the fans. For many, Star Wars is dead. And Kennedy was so disliked that she was the star of the South Park show about Disney. Put a chick in it and make them gay. Astonishing that someone could destroy the franchise so spectacularly and still keep their job. Lucasfilm also brought with it the beloved Indiana Jones franchise and Willow, which many people thought of fondly and had potential. Well, the Willow series was so pointless, with the story being mainly about the princess being a lesbian pursuing her love, whilst Willow was a bit boring and kind of confessed he was a total fraud. Well, it was bland, and it had to be scrubbed as a tax write-off. A high-potential franchise turned into a planned failure on the balance sheet. Great work. Willow is truly destroyed. Indiana Jones has suffered a misstep with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, but after years of rewrites, Spielberg excused himself, and Phoebe Waller-on Clever Bridge was brought on to be set up as a replacement for Indy. Except that people don't watch sequels to see their heroes degraded and turned into drunken slobs who sit alone unloved, or even liked by anyone. We all leave our glory days behind, but the professor whose students wrote love notes on their eyelids in the first film has turned into an old loser whose peers barely register that he exists. His leaving party, his retirement is like oh, are you still here? He's a non-entity. But Disney still has Toy Story. Well, the final Toy Story film was, let's face it, a farewell. I walked out of the cinema thinking, not bad, please don't make another. However, a film studio is a factory and it has to keep churning out product. So we get the prequel that no one asked for. What could be Buzz Lightyear's backstory? Well, make sure that there's some space. Make sure there's lesbians, it'll be on message. I didn't see the film. A prequel that simply wasn't needed with the whiff of Disney indoctrination. Then there were the leaked videos of Disney executives. They were concerned that their agenda to present children with woke images would be discovered. There was the white male executive who told the story of the half-black and half-white writer who was kicked out of the writers' room because they didn't need another white male. Although he was half-black, his skin wasn't black enough. The divisive and destructive ideology of the woke elite found it more important to tick boxes than to create content. The job of films is to entertain. There were always activists in Hollywood, but as woke gained the ascendancy, there was a McCarthyite purge of anyone not woke enough, and anyone who didn't tick at least two boxes. Who cares if you're a good writer? Who cares if you're creative? Who cares if you know the canon of the genre or franchise? Who cares if you're a fan or understand what people want to see? What matters is that you're one or more protected category. A lesbian one-armed black woman who identifies as a cat is way more useful than a creative subject matter expert on Star Wars, for example. So we enter 2024 with a broken studio, with crashing attendances at parks, putting out record-breakingly bad box office results across Marvel, Star Wars, Lucasfilm, Pixar and Disney. Snow White was a chance to turn things around, but the new religion of woke accepts no dissent. Fans think your film is a hot mess, they are racist, they are misogynist. It's not that your film is a pathetic destruction of a franchise, it's that the audience are fundamentally bad people. Enter Snow White. Snow White immediately presents problems to the modern studio. Her defining characteristic was that she was white as snow. Well, that must be racist. And she was the fairest of them all. Fair-skinned, she's white, racist. She's saved by 7 dwarfs, that's ableist. She's saved by the kiss of a prince, stalker alert. Lack of consent, and he's white to boot, and he's male. She's a bit naive and innocent. Women don't have flaws unless they're TERFs. They scratched their heads and worked out a script which resolved these problems. She isn't white because of her skin, it's because she was lost in a blizzard once, long ago. She ain't saved by dwarfs, she meets and bosses around 7 fugitives from a circus freak show. She's fair, but fair doesn't mean beautiful, it means a strong warrior. They haven't added that definition to my dictionary, I think I need a new edition. She isn't saved by the prince, she saves him because cis males are inferior. Now the writers have resolved the challenges, and you need actors. Rachel Zegler, pretty and a practitioner of the new religion of woke. Or better still, she's Latina. That will underline that Snow White isn't a white. And who couldn't find a beautiful long lady charming? Perhaps that would be true if she kept her mouth shut and didn't arrogantly spit hate at every opportunity. The Wicked Queen, who could she be? Well, in the original, at times she was a ravaged old crone, ugly and bitter to the core, masked in magic. So they picked Gal Gadot. Well, the bad news is you don't need a mirror to know who the fairest of them all is. Gal Gadot is a beauty. The other bad news is that the Wicked Queen, the baddie, needs to have charisma and screen presence. You need a Hannibal Lecter or a Bond villain, a stage presence. Unfortunately, Gal Gadot is about as good at acting as she is ugly. Anyone who watched Heart of Stone knows she's a dreadful actress, suited to action, athleticism and beauty. She's not good at delivering lines or having acting range. The first trailer and the train crash interviews showed the disdain for the source material and a contempt for the viewers. Hundreds of millions have been spent on salvaging the hot mess that is Snow White. The circus freaks have become dwarfs, but not real ones, as that would be ableist against dwarfs. Or do we say little people? It's hard to keep up with the world of Disney. Instead, the trailer and shots from early screenings show horrifying CGI renders of dwarfs. The last few years have shown us that Disney is disconnected from their viewers and hold them in contempt. It's hard to sell people tickets when you trumpet your disdain for them. In a sensible world, there would have been a clearing of the house. Kennedy would have been at very least retired. The Disney board would have cleared house. Writers and directors of historic failures would find they had no new work. But Hollywood and Disney in particular subscribed to the new religion. When churches have failures of ethics and doctrine, they close ranks and double down. Those who don't subscribe to the woke religion are heretics. So Disney rounded on everyone who didn't passionately espouse the new religion, and as they said themselves, promote modern views on sexuality. Generations of parents didn't take their kids to Disney movies to find out about any form of sexuality. They sent them to avoid such messages. But to Disney, the message has become more important than the entertainment. Like most people, I'll be watching Snow White for free when it comes on streaming and laughing at what a steaming pile of excrement they present as entertainment. In the reviews of the best and worst films of 2024, reviewers seem pretty unanimous that Madam Web is at or near the top of the pile. So much talent, money, and the weight of a major studio, and that was the best they could come up with? Well, the trailers for Snow White suggest that Disney hasn't learnt the lesson from that. If they had any sense, they would bury it in the vault as a tax write-off, the same as Warner Brothers did with Batwoman. But Disney's committed to the message and will keep doubling down until they eviscerate the legacy of 100 years of real artists creating real entertainment, standing on the shoulders of giants and slaying those giants and that legacy as they do so. Well done, Disney. 100 years turned to dust, and a Snow White film that will underline this failure.